Making Babies in Your 40s, Episode 10, Legal Obstacles. Most people think the only obstacles to baby making in your 40s are biological. They are certainly the ones front of mind, but depending on how you are trying to make a baby, there can be legal obstacles. So let's cover the field. Donors are not parents legally or functionally. However, if a donor is someone you know, particularly someone you were in an intimate relationship with at one point, then it would obviously be advisable to have a legal agreement in place because otherwise the donor could be viewed as the father. But in the normal case, a donor is a donor and not functionally a father, nor recorded as such on the child's birth certificate. In that case, they will not be granted parental rights by a court. The other laws that are relevant are those that limit the number of children from the same donor and also laws that require the donor's identity to be registered and available to the child at age 18 or similar. So these laws differ between countries and states. Then you have clinic practices, which vary between clinics, but typically require counselling beforehand for each of the parties involved. The next category of laws are those in and around surrogacy. Now, thankfully, a lot of the legal obstacles that previously existed for single women or gay couples entering into a surrogacy arrangement no longer exist in a lot of countries. Some countries or states have different levels of bureaucratic involvement in the process. Some have a lot of involvement and government bodies are established to approve you as an intended parent, akin to the adoption process. Some have no government bodies overseeing the process apart from the involvement of the courts. Right? The courts are needed in some cases to issue parental orders down the track when a child is born via surrogacy. For those countries that regard the surrogate as the mother and record her name on the birth certificate, courts are obviously needed to change that. You need an order from the court declaring the intended parents as the parents. In that way, a new birth certificate can issue showing the intended parents as the parents of the child. There are different restrictions in different countries. Sometimes this can only be done after a number of months have elapsed, say 6 months, and usually it can only be done, of course, with the consent of the surrogate because they are regarded as the mother at birth. Obviously, this is a really big concern for parents and surrogates. It's the single biggest reason why parents sometimes go overseas to engage a surrogate. They go to those countries that recognise the intended parents as the parents of the child from the moment the child is born. So there's a pre-birth order in place. Now, in terms of legal bans, those that remain in various countries tend to focus on the commercial element of getting help from someone else. So paying for donor eggs and sperm or paying for a surrogate. So in other words, altruistic donors and surrogates are fine, but paying for help beyond out-of-pocket medical and a limited category of expenses is not in those countries. It's illegal sometimes. It depends on what country and state you live in. The world can be divided into those that ban commercial donorship and commercial surrogacy and those that don't, and also those that have no laws on the topic whatsoever. No laws is not a good thing either because you can't use the legal process to be recognised as a parent of the child. It's just as limiting as a ban in that sense. Obviously, any local ban on an activity should be adhered to because you are clearly subject to the local laws. So if you engage a commercial surrogate and commercial surrogacy is banned, then you will have trouble going to the court asking for a parental order, and they may be more inclined to grant a lesser type of order, a parental responsibility order, which is not the same. And that's the best case scenario. The worst case is obviously landing in jail. Sometimes a local ban extends beyond the country's shores, so extraterritorially, as you see with other types of offences, typically things like drug-related offences and terrorism offences. It's not often done because the idea is that there needs to be a compelling reason to govern beyond your country's shores. Arguably, baby making doesn't provide a compelling reason, depending on which side of the fence you're on. As regards those states or countries that ban extraterritorially, you also have a divide in terms of whether the offences are actually prosecuted. Some countries choose to prosecute the offence and some do not, simply turning a blind eye to the illegality. The second approach is understandable. Few governments have any interest in wanting to imprison parents who complied with overseas laws but technically breached the black letter of the local laws. Some governments also go so far as to sidestep the overseas ban completely by granting citizenship to the offspring. So the parents are not just not prosecuted, but they are aided. Their request for citizenship for their child is approved. Again, understandable, because to do otherwise would potentially render the offspring without a passport in their parents' home country. And if for some reason the child can't get an overseas passport because the overseas country changes its laws or never offered a passport in the first place to children born via surrogacy in the country, the child is rendered stateless. So it's a real problem. Remembering here that what we're talking about is something that is legal in the overseas country in which it is done. So surrogacy is legal, but it's not legal, commercial surrogacy, in the parent's home country, which bans the activity, not just locally, but beyond its shores. So for this reason, it's important that what you do is not only legal in the overseas country, but that you actually get a passport issued in that country. You don't want your child stateless. You need to travel out of the country as a practical matter with your child using 2 passports. You need your passport and your child's passport. You don't want to have to be contacting your foreign embassy to get an emergency passport issued in your home country just to travel home with your child. You could be waiting a long time, particularly if there's an extraterritorial ban. You might legitimately ask, why pay a commercial sum if it creates all these problems in certain countries? Well, the main reason is because paying nothing for something often doesn't generate much widespread interest. People are all in the midst of their own life struggles, especially taking account of the time involved and risks of being a donor or a surrogate. Second, you may want more information or more service than is provided because the egg or sperm bank or Facebook group of potential surrogates has been set up altruistically, meaning there's no commercial element. Introducing a commercial element often brings with it greater choice, more information, and really importantly, a more robust system that deals with the risks better. Both intended parents and surrogates want parents on the birth certificate from the baby's birth. That's often only done in those countries that legalise commercial surrogacy. And that's because the laws have been passed to recognise what the participants actually want, rather than treating the arrangement in the same way as a normal birth outside of a surrogacy arrangement. It's not a normal birth. Intended parents don't want to be subject to the arbitrary whim of their surrogate if their surrogate's consent is needed for a new birth certificate to issue. They don't want to be in limbo for any period of time between the birth and this happening, presuming it does happen and presuming the surrogate doesn't want to be the legal mother of the child. So this is what's led to so-called reproductive tourism. It's the flight to the place that offers the gold standard in terms of regulating the industry and providing a legal process to legitimise it, and providing, most importantly, a birth certificate naming the intended parents as the parents from birth, and also a passport for the child. A birth certificate and passport are the key. The places that are the most liberal in their laws often see an industry that is built up around those laws. But that is not enough in and of itself. You need robust laws to protect all participants. Obviously, that presupposes the country has the rule of law to begin with. I wouldn't recommend going elsewhere simply because there is no protection against corruption. That is why countries that lack the rule of law are the ones that get mired in scandals. Now, you typically get two reactions to laws that criminalise conduct. People tend not to want to run foul of the law so as not to land in jail. Very sensible. People are generally knowledgeable about types of offences that are in the news, things like assault, robbery, murder. The more esoteric the laws or out of sway with public opinion the laws, the less people take notice. And that's simply because they are often not prosecuted. So, with a law that bans commercial surrogacy overseas, extraterritorially, a lot of people are simply ignorant of that law. Now, ignorance of the law is no excuse. You can still be prosecuted. But what happens is these people, blissfully ignorant of the law, often blissfully breach it. They're none the wiser, and they're not prosecuted because the governments have no interest in prosecuting and putting in jail intended parents. And then you have the other category of person, perhaps lawyers by profession or people who are just more aware through other channels of the laws. They may decide that the ban on commercial surrogacy removes the option entirely. So ironically, you can see that a more informed and law-abiding person may find their path to parenthood closed off because they don't want to be in breach of the law. Then you also have another category of person which analyzes the law, looks at it and says that law is a bad law. It's one that is not being prosecuted. It's effectively being sidestepped by the government and the executive arm of the government and is therefore law only in name. If breached, the person suffers no consequences, and many, many people have gone before and suffered no consequences. That type of person may pragmatically decide that the near negligible risk of prosecution justifies breaching the law because, in their opinion, it is a bad law and one that is not prosecuted. Now, eventually, this type of view, if it becomes mainstream, results in the repeal of the bad law. But in the interim, you have essentially people willing to breach what they consider to be bad laws with zero risk of prosecution. These people tend to be of a very independent mindset, not easily swayed by public opinion, and prepared to breach the black letter of the law. Now, I'm not advocating one way or the other. I'm simply describing the different mindsets to what is a legal challenge. The irony is that breaching an overseas ban can be sidestepped and the parents recognised as the parents in the sense that their child is granted citizenship by descent. So the foreign birth certificate is recognised, even though no court locally pronounces the parents as having legal parental status. And I should add that some courts have previously declined to grant orders of parental status if they are sought, opting instead for lesser orders, so parental responsibility type orders. But practically speaking, with a passport and Medicare, health card and a foreign birth certificate, that's all you need. Whereas if you do the same thing locally and breach the local laws by paying a surrogate, that could actually result in you not getting parental status from the court and not getting the birth certificate changed to recognise you as a parent. The birth certificate may remain as is and name the surrogate as the parent, even if this doesn't accord with the wishes of both the surrogate and the intended parents. And this is because the local process involves the local laws and the local apparatus, namely the local courts that must apply the law. So when you do the same thing abroad, you're relying on the foreign laws and the foreign courts, and all you need locally is the executive function of the government, so the Department of Home Affairs to grant citizenship and the Department of Foreign Affairs to issue a passport based on that citizenship grant, despite the technical breach. So it's a really odd scenario where breaching a law has no effect if the breach is committed overseas, but has dire consequences if done locally. So if you get a foreign birth certificate and you use that to get your child citizenship by descent at home, then that is all you need as a parent to secure for your child their rights as a citizen to a passport, to health, and all other rights that are granted in that country. You wouldn't bother seeking a court order to recognise your parental status because you would risk an order that denied you this because you've technically breached the local laws. Now, given you can enrol your child in school and do everything you would want as a parent of the child to do, it seems pointless. This is a very odd scenario, as I said, where a breach locally has consequences that a breach overseas does not, despite what the law strictly says. So it's obviously not ideal because it encourages breach by going overseas. Circumvention of the local laws by going overseas ultimately brings the particular law into disrepute because it's frequently sidestepped. But on a positive note, this is also the path to repeal of defunct laws. Ultimately, repealed laws are initially regarded as morally questionable, increasingly ignored, wrong or bad by the majority of people, and ultimately repealed. But in the meantime, of course, the laws need to be navigated, and so knowledge of the law will help you make a good decision and relieve heartache down the track. You can assess the risks better and work out whether the risks can be mitigated and whether the risks are practically and legally near negligible by engaging a lawyer in your state or country to give you advice. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you for watching Making Babies in Your 40s. Would love to know what you think and what you would like covered. Please leave your comments and subscribe to my channel. See you next time.